Hey everyone, welcome to True Lore Archives. Tonight we re-stepping inside a place the tour guides still whisper about the old Maine at the Penitentiary of New Mexico, a few miles south of Santa Fe. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It happened over one winter weekend in 1980, when a prison built for control turned into a place where control didn't exist. If you're new here, subscribe for more real American history that stares back at you. Now lights down, doors locked. Let's walk the corridor. You stop at a heavy steel door. The paint is the color of old teeth, and someone long ago scratched two words into it: Old Maine. Daylight tours come through here all the time. They move in quiet little knots, shuffling from cell to cell, while the guide keeps his voice soft, like he's speaking in a church. It feels wrong to be loud here. The guide points out the housing tiers, the quiet blocks where men tried to sleep through their sentences. The row reserved for the ones who needed shielding informants, ex-cops that assaulted anyone. The general population would have torn apart if given the chance. On the concrete, you still see circles where bunk legs stood. A page from a wall calendar, January 1980 stares back like a stopped clock. Down the hallway, the shops, once hot with welding and grease, and the chow hall, where the sound was always too big for the room. Overcrowding is a number on paper until you picture it. 2 men to a bunk, third on the floor, mattresses turning the aisle into a sleeping trench. Medical care cut to the bone, programs canceled, guard posts undermanned and exhausted. And the prison didn't just run short on resources, it ran short on oxygen. And complaints, small humiliations, lost sleep, all of it settled like dust in the ventilation. And one weekend, the dust flashed. Saturday night bled into Sunday, February 2nd, 1980. The graveyard shift was thin. In a dorm-style block, somebody who knew how to work a door latch spent a minute too long fiddling with metal. Someone else diverted a guard with a question that required a closer look. A scuffle broke open like a dropped plate. A ring of keys skittered across the concrete and kissed a boot that didn't belong to an officer. In that instant, the geometry of the building inverted. Bars stopped being barriers and became weapons. Guards fell back toward control points they still trusted. Radios coughed alarms into the night, but you don't put a lid back on a boiling pot without getting burned. Men poured out of sleeping areas, some fully dressed, some pulling on pants while they ran. Stools shattered into clubs. In the industrial shops, the real prizes sat waiting. Hammers, bolt cutters, welding tanks, and worst of all, the acetylene torches. The first instinct was simple food. Storage rooms were hit, fridges pried open. The second instinct was older and meaner. Retribution. Torches howled to life in the corridor leading to protective custody. Blue-white flame turned steel orange, then cherry red, then soft. Metal sang like a tuning fork and dropped in a glowing arc. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else prayed. You don't want to see what came next. Behind those cut bars were the men the prison itself had labeled in need of protection. In a riot, protection reads like blood. The night stretched, and the lamps blinked. There wasn't anywhere to hide. Elsewhere, the riot's heart pumped faster. Rumors sprinted ahead of people. Don't shout. We have keys. All of them. Mattresses burned for light when the generator hiccuped, smoke dragging low and sticky. 2 captured officers became bargaining chips instead of bodies. They knew which panels unlocked which doors, which switches killed the siren. In a night like this, knowledge is currency. A man in a battered hat raised his arms to still a crowd. He was on T, a leader prison czarn. T good at letting those survive for long. Dodd. But he understood flame and metal better than most. He used to work in a garage. He didn't want chaos for chaos' sake. He wanted a way forward. Phones, control rooms, leverage. They moved toward administration. Phones across the county started ringing sheriff's offices, highway patrol, fire crews, even the governor's line. Night of weak timing is its own trap. Response would come, but not instantly. The prison could read a clock. It knew it had ours. In the noise, there's always one man who hears everything. Call him Loose Knot, his real name, but his file is real enough. 24. Armed robbery. A ragged scar from ear to collarbone that started as a bottle in some teenage fight. 2 days before the riot, he mailed his mother a letter asking for a picture of their house in El Paso. I want to remember what I'm walking back to. The letter would never arrive. That night, Luis was pinned between 2 tides. Join the crowd and become part of the storm, or duck out and risk being labeled prey. He knew a guy in protective custody had once given up his cousin to the cops. He could follow the torches. Instead, he dragged a kid from the kitchen, a skinny runner who always slipped him an extra heel of bread, into a supply closet. Wedged a trash bin against the door, soaked rags to choke the smoke. Then he stood outside with a length of broken chair, pretending he was deciding what to do. On the roof, men who still believed in the idea of escape waved knotted sheets like a distress flag to a sky that didn't take care. No helicopters, no sweeping searchlights. Just the thin string of headlights on the highway and a winter wind that smelled like dust and old metal. Outside the perimeter, engines stacked up. City police, state troopers, fire rigs, 2 ambulances. Reporters the deputies tried and failed to chase away. Relatives clustered far from the fence lines, some certain they knew who was inside. Others just hoping the silence meant nothing too awful. An officer unfolded a faded floor plan and realized half the doors on it no longer existed in the ways that mattered. The first mission was ugly and boring. Keep fire off the roof. Keep the riot inside the bowl. Inside, the senses reorganized themselves. A toilet with a cracked tank ticked like a metronome. Voices sorted into groups, one thin and twitchy, one baritone with a border town drawl. Somewhere, a taken guard asked for water, and someone gave it to him. A paper cup, a shaking hand. Near dawn, the riot's stamina failed. Portable light towers flared on the yard, turning the windows into rectangles of sick yellow. Torches ran out of breath. The crowd broke into islands. One not still hunting a door to cut, one not ready to hide, one intent on bargaining. Fire crews punched a hose through a chow hall window. A silver rope of water hissed along the floor and found the dirty flames. The building exhaled steam. Midday brought the first terms over a bullhorn. Food, water, a medic. Reasonable on paper, but everyone knew what was happening. Stall for time, harvest a few small wins, brace for the heavy boots. No one promised to listen to everything. When the improvised tactical team finally moved, the prison answered with something worse than noise. A thick post-storm quiet. Doors that still obeyed were forced with bars and wedges. Cells that felt like traps were cleared behind shields. Some men were found curled under mattresses, ash on their lips, pupils blown wide. Others wouldn't move. The job was brutal and simple. Break the loops of violence, pull people out of the machine one at a time. They pulled Luis out in the late light. No blood on him, his, or anyone else's. He gave his number before his name. Drank water like he'd forgotten how, and stared at the hose stream cutting a bright path through ash. In a report, someone would write, found an oblong. Did not resist. Removed. For the kitchen kid, survived due to cellmates' assistance. That word "do" would be the only clean thing on some pages. If you stand in Old Main today, guides don't linger on the worst acts of that night. Most visitors don't ask. They already sense it. What matters is what the building proved. A place designed for control can't promise it. It can only maintain a fragile network of deals between staff and schedule, between men and their own impulses, till one hiss of gas and one line of keys turn the map upside down. After the smoke came the paperwork. Investigations, depositions, firings, lawsuits, reams of recommendations. Some stuck. Some never made it past a press conference. None of it rewound an hour. Near the end of the tour, the guide stops at a bolted door that was once thrown wide open. "We stop here," he says. Past it, the restricted wing keeps a small museum of aftermath. A bent pry bar tagged with a number, a split key, a plastic ruler with a burn mark through the inch line, a tiny cross braided from toothbrush bristles and thread, in an envelope. Letters that never left. Luce's note to his mother is the first one the curator shows carefully by gloved corners. "Send me a photo of the house," it says in uneven pencil. "I want to put it next to my bunk. The house never came. The bunk never came back." What remained was the vessel, the prison itself. It holds not just crimes, but consequences. If you want me to continue what the official death toll was, how the state responded, who was punished, what changed and what didn't, say continue, and we'll go deeper. By the time the last door was forced and the last man walked out under a line of rifles, the numbers had hardened into something the state would never forget. The riot had run roughly 36 hours. No officers died, though many were beaten or cut, and a dozen had been taken hostage at one point or another. 30-plus inmates were dead. The official toll would settle at 33, most killed by other prisoners inside the storm they helped create. Outside, the governor's people faced two clocks. The humanitarian clock, get everyone out alive who could be saved. And the political clock explained how a maximum security prison turned into an abattoir on a weekend. Press briefings used words like stabilized, contained, secured. Inside the debriefing rooms, the language was plainer. Overcrowding, classification failures, dorm housing, staffing tools. The investigators started at the obvious places. Open bay dorms, big rooms with dozens of bunks. Let rumors travel faster than rules and let a few strong men run a whole tier. Protective custody sat like a bullseye in a building that gave angry people torches. There were too few officers for too many bodies, too many keys in circulation, too much that could be turned into a weapon. The paper record grew thick with photographs of cut gates and burned mattresses. Incident timelines measured in squealing acetylene and broken glass. They interviewed everyone who would talk. Guards running on 4 hours sleep between shifts. Maintenance men who'd begged to lock up the welding rigs tighter. Nurses who kept lists of meds that never arrived on time. Men like Luis, who didn't have a clean category to fall into neither hero nor monster. Just someone who made a choice in a hallway when the air was mostly smoke. In policy rooms across Santa Fe, recommendation became the state's new favorite word. Recommendations to end dorm-style housing for the highest risk levels. Recommendations to rebuild old main units into controlled, smaller pods where a problem could be sealed off before it grew teeth. Recommendations to tighten tool control so a torch wasn't a torch until 3 checklists agreed it was. Recommendations to separate informants, ex-cops, and the vulnerable behind barriers designed to survive more than a minute of flame. There were human recommendations to the kinds that rarely make headlines, but decide. Whether a Tuesday goes bad, more training for rookies, mandatory drills for disturbances, sane staffing ratios, mental health screening and intake, real grievance channels that don't require a man to shout to be heard. You can't engineer away every riot, the reports admitted. You can remove the tinder. Lawsuits arrived like winter birds, predictably, in flocks. Families asked why their sons were housed one door away from men who wanted them dead. Officers asked why they'd been left thin as thread on a midnight shift. Civil rights lawyers asked why a state that had already been warned about crowding and conditions hadn't moved faster. Money changed hands, so did jobs. Some people retired early, some were pushed, some stayed because someone had to. And then there was Old Main itself. Parts of it reopened, patched, and patrolled. While new units rose down the road, modernized blocks with the dull, practical geometry of lessons learned. Years later, Old Main closed for good as a living unit. It became what you walked through tonight, a museum of consequence. The tour script keeps facts and omits gore. Not to protect the guilty, but because the building itself does enough talking without it. What happened to Luis? Files don't write endings like novels do. He didn't leave on a medal, and he didn't leave in a bag. He went back behind a door with a number on it. Someone noted that he'd helped stash a kid from the kitchen. Someone else noted he hadn't joined the cutting crew. Parole boards don't have boxes for it didn't make it worse, but the people in the room remember it anyway. Years later, because time in prison is counted in years and hearings, Not Scenesleys did step into Sun as a free man, sent his mother a photograph instead, a rental house with a hard yard and a laundry line. It wasn't El Paso, it was close enough. The Old Main riot became a case study. Academy classrooms in other states used its timeline as a caution. Don T. Stackman like cordwood. Don't leave a torch where anger can reach it. Don't gamble that Saturday nights will be quiet because most of the world is sleeping. Some places listened, some didn't. The line between them is written in headlines most people skim and forget. When you finish the tour, the guide likes to end in the small room where they keep the artifacts behind glass. The bent pry bar. The key with the tooth snapped off. The toothbrush crossed the envelope of letters that never left. He says nothing for a long stretch and lets the room do the work. If someone asks him for the moral, he won't give one. He will repeat a sentence that shows up, in one form or another, in every serious report on the riot. You can control a building, you can't control what you refuse to understand. Prisons are measured by how they behave on ordinary days, but they redefined by how they behave on the worst ones. In 1980, this one failed in public. Out of that failure came changes you can't film, staffing schedules that make sense, checklists that are boring on purpose, logs that close a loophole before a man can stick his hand through it. Boring is the point. Boring is safety. When you step back into daylight, the desert looks indecently bright. Cars whisper past on the highway. A tour bus exhales. A raven drags its shadow over the yard. If you listen hard enough, you can still hear the old building settling steel on steel. A hinge breathing pipes talking to themselves. It's just a facility now. It's also a memory the whole state carries, whether it wants to or not. If you'd like, I can go one layer deeper. Names kept anonymous, but with specific decision points that let the riot ignite the latch. The keys, the first door cut, and the aftershocks. Internal discipline. Criminal charges, in which reforms actually stuck 5 and 10 years later. I'll say continue, and we'll keep walking. Decision points. How a building catches fire without a match. The official timelines pin the start of the event on a tiny nee.
Ugly true.
Big disasters like to enter through small doors. The first door opened because of 3 decisions that alone looked harmless, and together became a fuse. The latch. In a dorm unit, a spring-loaded latch that was supposed to demand a key had been helped along by time, wear, and habit. Men learned you could shim it with a sliver of metal shaved from a food tray or a strip off a light fixture press. Wiggle pop. It wasn't a secret. It was a convenience that staff knew about and meant to fix after count. Count came and went. The latch stayed. The keys. A set meant to stay put went walking past from one tired post to another. Clipped and unclipped until the idea of control became a ritual rather than a reality. When the fight broke out, the ring hit concrete and did the worst thing a key can do. It changed hands. The map. Protective custodian, guaranteed to be target sat behind gates that could be defeated with tools, kept a short jog away in the shops. No bad intent was required. It's only proximity. Good policy puts gasoline far from sparks. Old Main stacked them. Add to that a Saturday graveyard shift, a dorm packed beyond design, in a culture where grievances had nowhere to drain but sideways, and you don't need a mastermind. You need minutes. Inside the aftershock, what the state did next in the first week, inspectors photographed everything that would sit still. They traced scorch marks, measured where bars had been cut, sketched the angle of gates that bowed like ribs. They separated what the building did to itself from what men did to each other. The pile on the conference table split into 3 stacks. Operational failures, design failures, people failures. Operational, understaffed nights, sloppy key control, weak tool logs, radios that died inside the thickest walls, drills that existed on paper, design. Vast dorms managed by too few eyes. PC units reachable by the very tools needed to free them. Choke points that trap staff as easily as inmates. Control booths with glass that looked secure and wasn't. People. A culture that treated complaints as noise. Discipline system that punished loudly and listened quietly. Frontline officers asked to be both everywhere and nowhere. The recommendations wrote themselves. But this time, they didn't stay ink. And the biggest open bay dorms for higher risk classifications. Move to smaller pods you can isolate in seconds. Harden PC units barriers that buy time even against heat and force. Tool discipline, like an aircraft hangar. 2 signature issue, tethered inventories. Hot work permits for every spark. And rescue-rated extinguishers within arm's reach. Key control like a bank. Numbered sets, sealed envelopes, audits that hurt if they're wrong. Staffing and training, minimums by block and time of day. Real crisis drills, radios that pierce the dead zones. An established incident command playbook so a Saturday night doesn't have to improvise doctrine. Classification with teeth, keep separates actually separate, and recheck the file when rumors surge. Vent steam before it explodes, grievance channels that answer, medical lines that move. Mental health triage that isn't a clipboard and a shrug. Some changes hit fast locks, keys, head counts. Others arrived under pressure from the courts. Population caps, standards for square footage and sanitation, timelines that couldn't be kicked into the next budget year. Boring memos began to keep people alive. Accountability, the hard way criminal charges followed. But courtrooms don't love riots. Eyewitnesses are compromised. Scenes are filthy with smoke and fear. Motives overlap until a jury can't reliably pick a single knife from a pile. Men were convicted, assaults on staff, homicides that had too many witnesses to ignore. Others pled. Many cases collapsed into the gray area, where truth and proof don't touch. On the administrative side, jobs moved. A few officers were disciplined for the kind of negligence that hides behind routine keys. Checks doors left just this once. Supervisors retired early, some pushed by politics, others by the weight of what they'd seen. The warden's office traded nameplates. Training academies rewrote their first-week lectures. For families of the dead, none of it balanced the ledger. For some officers, none of it felt like enough. Accountability after a riot is like mopping a tide line. You see the wet floor, you still smell the ocean. 5 years later, what's stuck? Walk the newer units, and you'd feel the difference without a guide telling you. Pods with fewer men. Short sight lines, and doors that fail closed. Glass that held up when hit. Shops where you couldn't light a torch without 3 signatures and a clock running. Radios that worked in the meanest corners. A duty roster that didn't pretend 3 people could be 6. A riot cart staged and inventoried shields. Masks. Breaching tools checked at shift change because someone always asks, "Show me." The biggest change hid in paperwork. Classification went from an art to an audit. A man's enemies, vulnerabilities, and history stopped being gossip and became fields you had to fill. 10 years later. Culture or costume. A decade on, the blueprints had caught up, but the question was, had the culture? On a Tuesday night in a different winter, a rookie carried his first set of keys and knew exactly how many were on the ring. The sergeant could quote the drill schedule without checking the binder. When a rumor about a hit list bubbled up, it moved up the chain as a report, not a story. That's culture. And yet memory fades. Administrations change. Budgets tighten. The lesson of Old Main only lives as long as the boring things stay sacred. The best sign it had stuck was the absence of certain headlines, the kind that start with a place name and end with a body count. The people we don't put in reports? Luis did 2 more years. The kitchen kid earned a transfer and a line job where nobody asked him to choose sides. A nurse who had run on adrenaline that weekend went back to school. Came back as a mental health clinician and taught rookies how to hear panic before it gets loud. One of the taken officers took to carrying a paper cup of water on the range, not superstition. A reminder. Guides added a line near the end of the Old Main tour. Buildings Dante fail alone. It isn't an absolution, it's a directive. What changed beyond the fence? The riot broadened the conversation outside corrections. County emergency managers adopted a shared incident command vocabulary with the prison. So the next joint operation. Wouldn't T require translators? Hospitals ran surge drills with scenarios that sounded unthinkable the week before and normal the week after. Newsrooms refined how they report unlocked places without becoming rumor mills. Universities and training academies used the riot as a case study in systems failure. Show where a latch, key, and a map aligned. Have students move one variable at a time until the chain breaks. The point wasn't to gawk at a tragedy. It was to design out the next one. Why tell this story at all? Because prisons are part of the same country that builds schools and roads, and what they get wrong never stays inside. Because overcrowding is not a word. It's a temperature that melts locks. Because a Saturday policy can tilt a Sunday headline. Because the men who died that night deserve more than a number. The ones who didn't, guards, nurses, cooks, kid with an extra heel of bread, deserve to have their small right choices remembered. Step outside. The desert light is rude again. The Old Main bricks keep their heat anyway. You look back once at the bolted door and think about how thin the line is between "this is fine" and "we should have fixed that."